And we also have the Mississippi Writers Trail that we work with the Mississippi Arts Commission. We partner with them on that trail, which memorializes our authors. So these trail systems are one of our biggest tourist attractions by far. They're big, huge, bombastic markers that weigh about 100 pounds and stand about 8 to 10 feet tall. And depending on the trail, they may be blue or red or shaped in the shape of a book. Uh, but on the front is a forged cast gold lettering that tells a short story of why that person or place or thing is important to either the blues or country, uh, catapulting throughout the world from Mississippi, or our civil rights leaders, or our literary heroes. The back of that marker tells more of a robust story, as well as more of a pictorial story. And people come from all over the world, all over the country to follow these trails, and they end up not only in our metropolitan areas, but in our nook and cranny cities and towns and real small places. And so it causes those places to thrive. It brings people who never would have ended up in, a town of a few hundred people, but they're there to experience the culture. They're there to experience the history, and then, of course, these cities, these towns, they envelop these travelers and they push love and food and all of their sites. And so the community really rallies behind these marker systems to welcome and to tell their history to the people who come from outside of the borders, as well as within the state. So outside of that, we focus a lot on live events. We sponsor in-state and out-of-state live events that we think bring tourists to Mississippi, that tell our story correctly. And we physically go set up and talk to people, incentivize them to visit our state, talk about how wonderful it is, why we are the birthplace of America's music. And we hand out plenty of cool stuff, but more than anything, we give them the experience of our heart and of the people of Mississippi, which is the crown jewel of our tourist attraction.
Thank you, Kamel. So, we community came up a bunch, and I guess I want to drill down a little on the picture side of what you said. So, for John and or Kamel, how do you find those pictures? How do you pick those pictures? And my guess is there's a lot more pictures than just the pictures you're putting on there. So how do you tell what stories go on those markers? And I think, given how visual this industry is, uh, at least give some space to the pictorial side of it.
Sure. And I'd love for John to step in also, because he's on the front line of our Mississippi Freedom Trail, which they source a lot of pictures. But what we have is we have a outside source who is kind of our project manager, and they've been a part of our trail system from the beginning. What they do and also with the Humanities Council, we hire some very, very vetted historians and writers who have the writers and historians that we have with the Blues and Country Music Trail have been there since day one. They are vastly published. They are learned professors, and they have published many books and articles. So they know their stuff, but they also do very in-depth, deep dive interviews within the cities and the towns and the family. And even when it comes to licensing these photos, we cut a lot of licensing deals so that we can tell the story as accurate as possible and as real as possible. So we end up in a lot of licensing deals because we want to source the real, uh, authentic, organic part of the story, and not something that is drawn up, or some pictures that everybody uses to tell, very popular stories. We want to tell it down to a granular level, if at all possible, within those characters that you can fit on the back of the marker. John?
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, working with various communities, um, throughout the state who, I mean, you've got folks who are still connected to this history. I mean, it's not 300 years ago, 400 years ago. A lot of people who are part of the civil rights movement are still living. And so we work with them, though the local community, either organizations, the NAACP, local NAACP, or even, like I said, with the family, to get photographs of said person, place, or thing, to make it, as Kamel said, as authentic a story as possible. And then we use the captions for those photographs to help extend the story. So like you said, on the front of a normal Freedom Trail marker, there is just a abbreviated overall summary of what happened, and then on the back it is a more in-depth story with photographs. And when I say in-depth, it's about, close to like 400 words, something like that, 430 words, and then photographs to go with it. So the photographs typically go from like 8 to 10 photographs, and then they have different captions to help pull out a lot of the things that you read from that 400 word document, or 400 word on the back, and then you kind of bring out pieces of that story with the photograph, so you can actually see what these folks look like, or see the place that we're talking about, or see what the place actually looked like in the 1960s or 50s. Because a lot of places that we would put the markers at the building or whatever is not there anymore, or it's not the same. So we'll have a picture of what it used to look like as well. So and like I said, working with community members to get these photographs and make sure that they are high quality, and working with that the source that Kamel was mentioning, to make sure that we get high quality photographs, and then that we are paying those the AP or the UPIs or whatever, even the Getty images, to make sure that we get the right photograph to tell the story.
Starting with John and then Kamel, to whatever degree this is applicable to you, what have been the biggest challenges with these projects?
Well, I think the number one thing is everything's political. When things don't seem like it's political, like the facts, like and then there's things that you wouldn't think, like there's people that you wouldn't think would have a political view on certain stories, and they surprise you. So there, without being just specific, just like everything is political, and there's ways that you have to go into these communities, and no community is the same. And there's learned in my doing this for the past 2 years, like they're communities that want to tell the story for sure. They feel like they're the person that lived in their community, that was a part of the civil rights movement, should be top tier, a number one. But then it's a way that you have to say it, right, that can massage all things. But then also we want to make sure that it's factual, and that it is like we're getting our sources credibly. So that's another thing. But just to be quick about it, everything is political, even the things that you don't think are. And the places that you think in Mississippi, like we were thinking about Mississippi, that do not want to tell the stories, especially stories that actually are damning and are hurtful, you'd be surprised at the communities that actually want to support and uplift. Not to say that this place is the same and it's like that still, but to show that they are moving forward. So I had a little along my journey in this work with the Freedom Trail, I had a little bit of awakening with some place. There were some places where I did not think that I would be welcome, and I was welcome with open arms. There were some places where I thought, well, like the city council or the board of directors or supervisors are going to shut this down. They're not about to put this on the courthouse steps. And they actually unanimously voted to put a Freedom Trail marker on the courthouse steps, the same place where people were denied the right to vote. So, like, you know, you think about that, and you think about progress, and you think about how what a real reconciliation is. People really have not, like, really found, in my opinion, found what true reconciliation is. But the only way to true reconciliation is dealing with um your past, right? And so I found that a lot of places in Mississippi are at that point where they're dealing with it, you know.
Kamel, did you want to add it? Yeah.
Well, John, that was a great point. I think, like you said, the biggest challenge is the political side, and it's a crazy balancing act. And if you were to look from the outside in, you would think, oh well, they're just telling the story of this bluesman or this blues woman or of this, freedom trail, fighter or freedom civil rights fighter. No, you are balancing, like you said, the political figures in that area, and we're talking about from a city and town all the way to a Senate or Congressperson who is there. They're going to be at some point probably involved. You've got to balance the family telling the story versus a historical researched story, and combining the two so that you come out with as clear of the truth as possible. Because we've had a nice handful or two where the family would have a recollection of a certain story, and but the history says something different. And you have to be very careful what you say, because some of these stories are very deep into the community and contain a lot of hurt, and not just contained within the Mississippi Freedom Trail. Of course, that automatically comes with many, many heartstrings, many tragedies, many things that are a black eye on our history, no pun intended. But it is, these other trail systems are just as involved. And I'll give you an example, but I won't tell the actual marker. We have a marker of a bluesman that was in a rural city, and the grandmother of that marker fought venomously about the fact that she felt that it was not in the right place. It was outside of a storefront where her grandfather wouldn't have even been welcomed as a African American man. And so with this marker sitting outside of that storefront saying, like, this is where he got his start, and this is, for her, it was an ongoing open wound, because it was to her saying, this marker shouldn't even be here because my grandfather wouldn't have even been able to walk into that store. You are telling the story incorrectly. It is at the wrong place. It should be here where his family resides, where his church was. And it became a real struggle, not because we didn't want to tell the story right. When the marker was produced as accurate as possible, the story was told. But I mean, she really, really was coming very hard at the body over the marker system, as she should. And she came before the commission, made her argument, and overwhelmingly the commission decided to make a change and move the marker. Well, that's a whole process. These markers cost in excess of $10,000. They have to be repaired. When they have to be repaired, they're usually about $2,000 if it's small. If they're broken, it's almost like redoing it over again outside of the research. So it's just not a notion to move a marker. These are historical elements that saying right here is when that happened. So when you change the story, there has to be really good reason. And so, and sometimes you have to stand behind your research in lieu of what the family may be saying, because the research says something different. And we need to make sure that these trail systems, because the one thing that will undo the thread of all of it are stories that are not told right and that don't have very vetted truth to it that you can stand behind. And we also have to admit to ourselves, we get it wrong sometimes. And a trail system, consisting of 300 and some odd markers throughout countries and other states, sometimes you get it wrong and you have to be ready to change that. So just like John said, it goes from the Senate floor all the way down to the bare community where people who are still living, who have heartstrings wrapped up into it, and you've got to balance all of that with true history.
Thank you. So I've got one more question for both of you, then we'll open it up if any attendees have questions, and then we'll bring Larry into the conversation. So my question for John and Kamel, we've got folks here who might not have markers in the way you guys do, might not have trails yet, might be working with folks who need or want to have these. What advice do you have for anybody who's looking to do similar work around markers and trails?
You go
Well,
ahead, Kamel.
you go, okay. We've actually had other states to try to imitate the same thing, and it hadn't gotten off the ground the right way. I would say the first thing, and I think what was very important about the way these trail systems started, or at least I know the Blues Trail and the Blues Trail, the Freedom Trail, and the Country Music Trail, but certainly the Country and Blues. It started off as a bill. The bill then created the commission that presided over the trail system. And within that bill, the governor, the lieutenant governor, speaker of the House, they had certain appointees, but then there were also signified appointees that would come from other agencies. So it was a well-rounded body of people who sit on these commissions. Well, that commission is a legislative body. So then that requires it to have a lot of integrity at that point. Then that commission meets and then hires historians. So I think that was a real key to it, because it wasn't just a group of community leaders who had a good idea. It wasn't just people who were vested and invested in that genre of music or in civil rights or in the literary world. It was a legislative body. And so at that point, when we had a legislative body, then that opens up going to, the going after other grants, going after endowment grants, going after art grants, going after Department of Transportation grants. So when it's a body like that, you're able to go after more money to fund it, because these things are not inexpensive. And if you're doing it off of contributions or off of a investor, or if you're doing it off of community fundraising, it's going to be a very slow process. So I think by laying the groundwork with it being a political body, and that groundwork being able to go after the larger grants that in federal grants, that made it to where it was something that could survive more than a couple of years more. And now we're headed towards 20 years.
That was
Yeah.
great. Thank you, Kamel. John?
I'd say just to that, once you do have this commission put together and you're just starting, I think that you should allow the commission to come up with, some general markers that should be put up, and then open, once you get that done, that like you've got like a good solid 20 or 30 done. I think you should open it up to the community and see what stories they want to hear, or not just hear, what stories they want to cement as stories that represent them. So that they have buy-in to the trail. And then also, as I think you mentioned, Kamel, this isn't just, storytelling and truth telling and things like that. Like, this is adding to tourism dollars too. So, we want folks to be proud of the markers that are in their community, and people who know those stories can share with folks, when they're going along the trail. So they're not just going there to see a marker, but they're going there to see a community and share with the community and spend money with the community and learn more about the community that ties them to the state of Mississippi. So
Thank you, John. Dr. Ramona LaRoche has a really great question. So we're talking about pictures and writing. What about oral histories? Is there a repository of related oral histories? If so, where are they located? And then a bonus question for Kamel, if you have any relatives in South Carolina.
Let me see. Do I? Not that I know of. The King side of the family is from Louisiana, and my mother's side of the family is based out of Mississippi. But I'm sure we spread all over the place.
Okay, my
Thank
my
you,
my
Doctor.
mother's a King from Georgetown, South Carolina, so that's why
Oh,
I asked.
wow.
And I'm also
Wow.
a genealogist, so just want to give it.
Excellent. Excellent.
My fiance is from Greenville, South Carolina.
Wow.
Okay.
But there is a various depositories of oral histories um, within the state of Mississippi. So you've got the Department of Archives and History has a depository of oral histories. You have the University of Southern Mississippi. They have a whole like oral history department that was really like going strong for like I'd say maybe 15 years. For some reason, it kind of slowed down, but we work the Department of the Mississippi Humanities Council works with them and their oral history department. And then I think Mississippi State and Ole Miss does too, but if you're looking for some really like hefty oral history um, collections, you're gonna find them at the Department of Archives and History and USM. But also, I forgot to mention Jackson State University at the Margaret Walker Center. The
Oh
Margaret
yeah, I've
Walker
been there.
Center, yeah,
Mhm.
they also they focus on oral histories as well. So, and the Humanities Council has worked with them. So, like, if you are looking to do work with oral historians, and here in Mississippi, you can contact us and we can connect you to the people you need to get connected to. We also give out oral history grants as well to do oral history projects. So, and then we partner with the Margaret Walker Center or the Department of Archives and History to house those. So
I'm based in Fort Lauderdale. I'm at the African American Research Library, and so we're creating an oral history lab. So I'm just kind of, wanted to talk to some other people about, the protocols and what has worked for them best in terms of working with the community for them to come in and actually do oral histories with us on their own. Um, yeah, so that's a good thing. I also want to say my son went to Piney Woods School.
okay,
Yeah, so I have
nice.
some connection there. It's been a while ago. He's 30 now, but he did go there.
Nice. Right down Highway 49.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Good catfish.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Yes.
Thank you.
So if we have a couple minutes at the end, Dr. LaRoche, I think it'd be great to hear about your work, but I want to bring Larry in.
Sure,
Larry,
sure,
can we
sure.
start with, what are you doing here?
I
Who is
am-
Larry?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I am a travel journalist and I run a website and I have for 15 years now called civilrightstravel.com. It's kind of my passion project. It's sort of what I do around my work, and it's always like any other passion project. I don't get to do as much as I'd like, but I've been doing it for 15 years and I've visited civil rights sites all over the country and written about them. Let me start by saying, Kamel and John, that was fascinating to hear the sort of the nitty gritty behind the markers. I have been one who has seen, I'll drive 30 miles out of my way for an historic marker and I'll take pictures of it. And I always knew there was a backstory, and it's really fascinating to hear some of the things that you all were saying. But back to me as a writing about civil rights history. I was living in Birmingham, Alabama. I was working for the Southern Living Group, those magazines. And I realized that there was this incredible history all around me. There were people in town who had babysat Martin Luther King's kids, who, were opened their homes to King when he was in town for meetings and protests. And I realized, I couldn't go to Gettysburg and talk to people who fought there. I couldn't go to the Alamo, but I could talk to people, the foot soldiers who made history. And they were just living a few miles from me. And I started this website, and it gave me a window into this world. It's something that I guess I'll address the question right here. It's a fair question to ask. Why is a white guy talking about African American history? It's great. I've asked myself that, and I continue to. And my thought is that this is not just Black history, it's American history. And it's really a crucial part of our country's history. It's an inspiring, it's a frustrating, it's a messy, and it's a part of what we are. And I think people need to know that and want to know that. And I guess that's the other part. These stories need to be told. We need to get as many people as possible to get the word out about these places and about visiting the sites where this history happened and to learn this history. And that's what I see what I'm doing. Tomorrow I'm getting on a plane. I'm getting up way too early to go to Topeka. It's one of the last civil rights sites I haven't been to, where the Brown versus Board of Education historic site is located. Because there's just so, the more you dig, the more you write about it, the more you ask questions, the more you learn. I think it's interesting. I can go on from there. I wanted to talk about how civil rights tourism seems to have changed in the years I've been writing about it. But I don't know if you want to
Yes.
talk about that.
Yeah, please.
If the topic has changed, I mean, I started in 2010. In many ways, it's wonderful. More places are recognizing civil rights history and more places are preserving it. There's a growing recognition that this is really something important and it needs to be preserved. And I find even in this incredibly polarized society that we are living in right now, in the middle of an election season, that's it. That's all I'm going to say about that. There still isn't a lot of pushback once these sites are up and running. There probably is behind the scenes, but as a journalist writing about visiting these places and seeing the people that come to these places, there is a growing acceptance that this is history that needs to be told. In the last 15 years, some important things have happened. The Smithsonian opened the National Museum of African American History, and that has changed the way tourism works in one of the most touristed cities in the world. It's now the second most popular museum in Washington, right behind the Natural History Museum, ahead of the Air and Space Museum. So many people come to that museum. Incredibly well done one. And as you know, the emotional fulcrum of that whole museum is when you get to Emmett Till's coffin. When you see that, you see people in tears, you see people in shock, and the story is being told every day in Washington through a site like this. And I think that's really incredible. Another change has happened closer to where I was living in Montgomery. Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative opened the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, the so-called lynching museum. And it is an emotionally devastating site. And people come to it every day. And it has really changed the way folks around the country talk about and address racial violence. Because of that museum, there are now historic markers, hundreds of them around the country, and not just in the South, recognizing the site of racial violence. So this is what I just see, this incredibly powerful loop that happens as these sites open. And as people start telling these stories, there sends ripples out across the country. We've also, and then I'll just talk about Mississippi. I've seen a big change in Mississippi. It's now a crucial part of the Civil Rights Trail. We have the markers that we were talking about. We have the museum in Jackson, the Civil Rights Museum, one of the best in the country. Very, very moving site.
Yeah,
and
she's
we
back
have-
to Eli. And the other boys, but Alice is still here.
We also have the Emmett Till site is now part of the National Park Service. And we have the Medgar Evers site in Jackson, which is now which the National Park Service is now managing. So I've seen a lot of changes. I'll end on this. A friend of mine, Megan, who works as a travel journalist, has noticed what she calls the new eighth grade field trip. It often is, and for many people, the eighth grade field trip is you get parents who are, God willing, God bless them, to put on T-shirts and join these kids and take them all to Washington, D.C. for the eighth grade history field trip. More and more people today are taking the eighth grade civil rights trail field trip. They're going to Atlanta, to Selma, to Birmingham, to Jackson, to Memphis, and they're recreating and visiting sites where these things happen. And I think that's powerful for the next generation, because we all know the power of place is so important. It's one thing to read about it. It's another thing to be on the ground where these things happen. And I'm very moved by what's out there and excited by what's coming, because there always seems to be more.
Thanks, Larry. What do you think the role of travel media is? We have this session today of the past is not past, and a lot of times when people think about travel and stories, certainly not every travel media person or outlet is guilty of it, but there's a lot of focus on vacations and having fun and things like that. So what do you see as travel media's role generally when it comes to these stories that are not, are traumatic, if we want to be very specific?
Well, I mean, I don't know, people can take vacation and relax and have fun. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think there are untold stories any place you go that could be part of an afternoon. And every writer should be, maybe if it's not, I think every writer has an opportunity to see and find these stories, and too many people overlook it. I was astonished when I was in Las Vegas. There's a place where people go for fun, a couple years ago, and there's really nobody telling the civil rights story of Las Vegas, which is a fascinating story. So I, asked the DMO, the Visitors Bureau, and just did some talking to a few people, and I found that you could piece together a great afternoon visiting sites to learn about how the NAACP integrated the casinos, how showed the first African-American showgirls. And there's a beautiful King monument north of Las Vegas, north of downtown, commemorating a visit that he made to Las Vegas. So there's stories everywhere. You just need to start asking. I think there's just an opportunity and this is me throwing this out to the DMOs out there, to find those stories and tell them. And once you start telling it and sharing it with travel journalists, visiting journalists, it starts getting the word out and it starts building momentum. A city with an incredible story to tell, and it still sort of shocks me, is Nashville, which is, every bachelorette party in the country seems to go to Nashville. Everybody's going to Nashville. And there's an incredible civil rights story there. The Nashville movement with John Lewis, where the Freedom Riders have a place there. And really the only place you can see that story is through a couple of markers, and there's a very nice exhibit at the Nashville Public Library. But there's a real need for a civil rights museum there. That said, a writer can still go there and find these sites and tell that story. So it's out there, and I think DMOs can really help.
So while we're on this topic, who's doing this really well? And in our conversations, you actually, and even today, you credited Mississippi with doing some things really well. We expand kind of into a broader space. Who's doing this storytelling really well?
Well, I think it's happening. We can talk at different levels. The National Park Service is doing things well. I think John could explain, understands better than I do about grant systems and grants and ways of funding for this. So on the national level, I find the National Park Service is working well. Statewide, Alabama has always been a leader in this, which I think surprises some people. But they really, Lee Santel really was a person that helped push and get people together for the Civil Rights Trail, the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. I was excited. Montgomery is going to be opening the Holt Street Memorial Church, which was just a wreck of a church. The congregation had left, but now it's open again as a museum. And this is where King sort of called the community of Montgomery together to start the boycott. It was the bus boycott, 4 days after Rosa Parks was arrested. It was a building that was falling down, and now it has a museum, a tour, and you can get in the church and you can hear his speech, where he basically 7 minutes that really changed the projection of our history. And these things are happening in little communities around the country. I find every town I go to, if you just scratch the surface a little bit, there's a civil rights story, and many places are beginning to tell that.
So Larry, with John and Kamel, we talked a lot about markers and trails. when it comes to other forms of tourism product related to civil rights and storytelling of this nature, what are seen, and when somebody's thinking about product development in this, what else beyond the trails and the markers would you advocate for people considering?
Well, I think the trails are an important part of it because they literally are navigating you to these communities that you probably would never, might very well never get to. It's so that needs to be on the map, so to speak, to get you there. And once there, that's powerful. That's the most important thing. You're getting people off the interstate, going to these communities. Once there, I think you want to go beyond an old locked church. I mean, that sounds rude. I don't mean that to be rude, but you need to have a way for people to interact with the site one way or another. A great way, and goodness, I've worked on committees, I've worked with volunteer organizations. Volunteer organizations are hard. You've got to get volunteers, but having a volunteer-led tour, having a place open, it's great if it's just open at any time, or if not, at least by appointment, that for individuals, and having somebody being able to open the door, unlock the church, take you in, and tell you a little bit of the story. A good example of that I saw was the First African Baptist Church in Dublin, Georgia. Dublin is a little town that I'd never heard of, and I came there because it has a great story. This is where Martin Luther King, as a 15-year-old, gave his first sort of public speech. He won an oratory contest in Georgia. And he came down there and addressed this congregation. I think he won first place. I'm not positive about that, but he was there. And then, as always, these stories aren't necessarily happy or rosy. He took a bus back with his teacher from Dublin back to Atlanta. And historians say this is one of the first times he really felt the sting of segregation. He was pushed to the back of the bus. And this was a very moving part of how he evolved and what happened. And so visiting this church, you can go in, you can hear, you can sit in those pews, you can hear about the speech, you can hear a segment of the speech, and you have really interacted with that. You have put yourself literally in the footsteps of a 15-year-old Martin Luther King. And that is something that people remember and they talk about, and they come back and they send people back.
Thank you, Larry. Politics has been brought up a few times. What is your take on, as a travel writer and for travel media, do you think there's a way to do this apolitically, or do you think that's the wrong question and people need to embrace the politics of this?
Ooh, that's a messy question, and it's a messy reality. Part of it is who you're writing for, what the audience is. I mean, this is kind of getting to inside baseball, but are you running for a general interest publication, or maybe an advocacy, or a group that has a certain point of view? But I think the wonderful thing that I really love of writing about this history is that it's history. And I mean, as Kamel and John said, people still argue about it, but a lot of this is established fact. Something happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, in March 1965. Something happened there. We can't deny that. And it's well established, and we can tell those stories. And I think at some point, depending on who you're writing for and what you're doing, you can connect it to more current events. But I think in some ways that almost lessens the power of it. I think when you have an example out there of what happened in humanity, and also the triumph of courage and bravery and the complications that followed, I think that makes a point in and of itself. In some ways, not always, but in some ways, less is more in that regard.
John, you certainly can ask a question to Larry. Larry, any final thoughts? And then we'll get to John for the question for Larry.
Well, I think other things that people can do about this, which is a way that I feel that this is civil rights tourism has evolved, is that it's not only a great way to tell the past, but it's also a great way to help the community in its present sense. And that means recommending and calling out and talking about Black-owned businesses, Black-owned restaurants, hotels, maybe touching on Green Book history if there's a Green Book site in town. there's a lot of ways to sort of not just make it the past, but make it helpful to the community. And I want to leave on one note that I find really inspiring. I mean, I don't want to be silly and pretend that there aren't incredible challenges, but just this week we saw, or last week, the U.S. Capitol has 50 statues in it, 2 from every state that they send to honor local state residents. Johnny Cash just went into for Arkansas's, one of Arkansas's statues, because they pulled out some Civil War generals. The other statue going in is Daisy Bates. Daisy Bates is one part of the Little Rock Nine who helped desegregate, you know, in that incredibly brave moment for these high school kids to walk into Little Rock High School, Central High School there. And in Virginia, Robert E. Lee has been taken out of the U.S. Capitol. And one of my favorite civil rights stories and heroes is Barbara Johns, who was a 16-year-old girl who who basically led a walkout of her all-black high school in Farmville, Virginia. And that became part of Brown v. Board of Ed. She is replacing Robert E. Lee in the U.S. Capitol. This is open for visitors, and visitors see this. And I think that makes an important point about how this history is being recognized and embraced, and is out there for us to see and write about.
Thank you, Larry. John, question for Larry.
So you mentioned a lot about places like Alabama, that really are tourist places or seen as significant because King was there. What is your take on places that are significant to the civil rights story, but don't have a King tie? Like, there's a lot of Mississippi sites, because Mississippi was doing the work before King got here. So, like, what would you say would get people more interested in those actual local stories? And then also, how can we educate the traveler to say, like, hey, there is more to the civil rights movement than just a Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks?
You are so right about that. And I'm guilty of, I just did that. I played up King in our conversation here. Well, I think you know better than I do. There are so many people out there. I think we just need to broaden our pantheon of civil rights heroes to talk about more of them. From you, Fanny, you have people at all levels, because this really happened with the foot soldiers. They were the ones, the local people, that put their lives and their businesses on the line. How to get that out? I think a lot of what you're doing is doing that. It's putting it on markers. It's making these names that aren't household names, making them important. That's what I love about the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. It really digs deep and tells those stories. I think also having some sort of, as I said, a way to interact in an interaction site, if it's a visitor center, or if it's an open house, or if it's just open 4 hours a week or on weekends, having people come in, get out of their car, and come in and meet local people and tell those stories, because that's what sticks with you, talking to the people who have lived it, who were there, who were denied the right to vote, or who saw the violence, or all these stories that make this such compelling history.
I'd also add to your piece about Statuary Hall, it would probably help Mississippi as well if we changed our statutes too.
As you said, it is all political.
Yeah, because we have Jay-Z George and James Zacharias George and Jefferson Davis.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So think about it, we had Medgar Evers and Fannie Lou Hamer, or Medgar Evers and Eudora Welty. How people coming to the nation's capital would view Mississippi in a different light and want to come visit Mississippi.
Well,
I want to thank you, Larry, Kamel, John. Any last words before Ami wraps this up and we move on to our next session? Kamel?
I just want to say thank you for having us, and what a wonderful conversation, and so many things that we do even outside of the Civil Rights Trail and our historical markers and in our museums is all a part of the nation's civil rights story. Even the Blues Trail markers, where you find out Ralph Limbo, who was a Sicilian immigrant, who ended up at Itta Bena and out of his furniture store produced records that got African American bluesmen out to the rest of the world. H.C. Spear, who was in Jackson and had a furniture store in Mississippi and put out artists, all the way to a Charlie Pride story of the country music trail where he broke ground for African Americans being in country music. It's the civil rights story has so many tentacles, including sports. I mean, outside of the civil rights leaders and music, sports was one of the biggest things that pushed unison throughout the country. So I think this story is just so deep and it has so many tributaries. We need people like Larry and like John to make sure all of these different stories get told.
Thank you, Kamel. John, last words?
Sorry. Yes. Just, these stories are important to be told. It is great that people like y'all are working to not only uplift tourism around the state or around the nation, but also focus on truth telling and go deeper into what different states make them who they are. And so, like Kamel said, these stories of our civil rights veterans and our blues musicians and things, that they make up Mississippi and they make up who we are. And it shows that we are more and we are better than the stereotypes that have been put out there. And so hopefully more people through travel see that and bring more people to the state to learn about our stories, because I'll end on this: Mississippi's stories are our currency, and what our people really shine through with that. So I just advise everybody, if you've never been to Mississippi, come on and learn more about our beautiful state, and don't let the news fool you. We do wear shoes and we are smart people here down here.
I'll vouch for that. I've enjoyed my trips to Mississippi over the past bit. So thank you, John, Kamel, Larry, Ami. I'll pass to you to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, John, Kamel, and Larry. Thank you so much for sharing with us today, and thank you everyone for participating. Brianna, if you could pop up that that slide. This was a wonderful first session. What a way to kick off this virtual summit. Thank you all so much. We are really grateful for your participation, and we hope that you'll keep the momentum going with us and keep stay on board. We've got session 2 starting right after this. As you know, we also have session 2 or day 2 and day 3 tomorrow and day after. We hope that you will join us for those as well. And additionally, I think, Brianna, if you can kick over to the other slide, we've got, as we mentioned at the beginning of the hour, we do have other events coming up. We've got our Certified DEI Travel Professional Credential course coming up in early November. We've got a couple of different options for folks to participate in this course material. Love to be able to share that with you. Please reach out if you're interested. And then we've got our awards dinner coming up on December 10th. We would love to see as many of you there to help us celebrate trailblazers in DEI. Some of you amongst the group today are nominees for the program, for the awards, as well as support our work with upcoming generation development with our Future Travel Leaders program. So we'd love to see you there. And as we're moving straight into session 2, Brianna, if you could pull up that slide, please, too. We'd like to welcome everyone to session 2 of the virtual summit.
Let's stop recording.